Back in the dark ages of the late 90s, if gaming news wasn't printed on the pages of a magazine or if you didn't have time to wait for a postage stamp sized video to load, it was hard to know what was out there and even harder to know how it played. Sure, you could try a game out by borrowing a friend's copy or paying Blockbuster for the honor, but to me, nothing compared to the absolute excitement of putting a demo disc in your console and gaining access to a whole handful of games to pick and choose from. Especially because most were brand new, or in some cases, previews of games not even released yet. It felt like having a mini E3 in disc form, to me at least. And I have so many fragmented memories of games I played on demo discs that I can't even remember the name of, just a hazy vision of a level I played, a main character I moved, or a single mechanic that just stuck out. In most cases, the end of the demo was the most I ever played of those games. But today, I'm going back to the first game I ever played on a demo disc, and finally clearing it off my backlog with Tomba! Exclamation point. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of BacklogBusters, where I'm busting out my gaming backlog with the help of your suggestions and finding out if these games are still worth playing today. Today's game has been stuck in my head since a friend offered me their PS1, as it'd been collecting dust for years ever since they upgraded to the PS2. I was stunned and beyond excited, having never owned anything PlayStation up until that point. I went home with a PS1 console and its accessories, but no games, except for PlayStation Interactive Volume 7, whose headlining game, at least in my eyes, was Tomba. And ever since that day, I've always wanted to find out what the full game was like. So over the last several weeks, I've been playing Tomba, which the sometimes wildly inaccurate How Long to Beat lists as 7 to 8 hours in length, and it's been slower going, as my workdays have been busier than normal and my entire household has been sick at various times over the last month, including our dogs. This led to exciting footage of the PS3 menu as I tried to play through my sickness and fell asleep after hitting record. But with everyone finally back at full health and seeing those ever-elusive credits, I'm ready to talk about this game. Now, some of you might be wondering, what's Tomba? And that's fair. The little I knew about this game was only because of my origin story with that demo disc, and I've barely heard a whisper of this game since. It didn't show up on the PlayStation Classic and has never been re-released on the Classics catalog of the PS4 or PS5, which explains why a loose disc sits at $75, and if you have the manual and case included, basically double that price. But against all odds, the PS3 store still functions and holds the largest library of PS1 games that you can still purchase today. Most of them are priced at $5 to $10, and a surprising number never came to any console since. This is despite Sony announcing plans to close this very store in 2021 and then backpedaling, seemingly because of fan feedback. This will soon make the PS3 the oldest console whose store is still open, as Nintendo shut the doors on the Wii U and 3DS back in 2023, and Microsoft is going to do the same for the 360 on July 29, 2024. And I'll save my rant for another day about how many digital-only games are lost to time because of these closures, which also affects the prices of physical releases, which aren't even fully safe from time with the looming threat of disc rot. If only there was some other avenue that's been preserving games against companies' wishes for all these years. Luckily, for now at least, I was able to download and play Tomba on my PS3. Booting up the game and making it past the nostalgic tones of the PS1, you're greeted by a charmingly animated logo for Whoopee Camp, which I implore you to read as one word with no pauses, or it loses a lot of its charm. Followed by an energetic animated intro setting up the ravenous, seemingly prehistoric main character, the evil pigs terrorizing a confusingly non-prehistoric looking person and showing the theft of your bracelet that kicks off your journey to the main menu, where upon selecting a new game, you get another fully animated intro of Tomba flipping and swinging through the trees, which points more towards Tarzan than the Stone Age I categorized this as earlier. You're immediately approached by a stranger who criticizes your hair and then gives you a quest before strangely just leaving town. You're then free to leap around, arms wide, chest out. You'll most likely land on the first enemy you see, not with a stomp, but with a full-body embrace, which the manual describes as a bite, but wow, that one single pixel of tooth sure is hard to make out. Jumping doesn't release the creature in your mouth, instead, just brings them along for the ride, but hitting the jump or attack button in mid-air, along with a direction, will throw them into obstacles or other enemies' forward points. Tomba also comes equipped with a yo-yo crossed with a mace, which feels like it should grapple things and yet does not. But the standout feature that stuck with me all these years later was Tomba's acrobatics, as you can climb up ledges, swing around limbs, hang on to strange flowers or fruit, and break the unwritten laws of 2D platformers by facing the background and climbing just straight up a wall, shattering my perception that this was just a game taking nicely animated 2D sprites and merging them with the third dimension just for looks or to show off the power of the PS1. But it's more than that. Tomba can then run around this background and interact with all of what I thought was just scenery before. And with that, we've covered my knowledge of this game from the demo. I would run back and forth and be content with this small grassy section to throw pigs around. To me, it still makes a strong impression because Tomba is fun to control. The world's vibrant, the flexibility to fling, grab, climb, plus Tomba's ability to interact with the background is very unique, especially for the time. Because back in December of 1997 in Japan and the summer of 1998 in North America and Europe, Mario's 2D moveset hadn't expanded to include wall jumps, and he wasn't hopping into the background other than for the occasional secret in Mario 3. Also, I can't remember climbing in many 2D games, other than the wall jumps in Mega Man X or the cling in Demon's Crest, or maybe drawing some connection to the swinging in Bionic Commando. Capcom games that I specifically bring up because the founder of Whoopee Camp, Takeru Fujiwara, had a hand in all of those titles, along with Ghouls and Ghosts, DuckTales, and the surprisingly fun Goof Troop that I played through about this time last year, before eventually leaving Capcom in 1995 to form this studio and make this very game we're talking about today. It might surprise you to learn that there's actually more to Tomba than just this house's front yard, and it only took me 25 years to figure out how to access it. My first trip into the background saw me absent-mindedly hit the pig mailbox with my weapon, giving me a furious tornado and a new event to clear some fog I'd never seen. So I just wandered around until the game hit me over the head with a hint, and I finally discovered that this game has an inventory, allowing me to clear the fog and open up a pumpkins with spinal cords filled area to explore. I caught a frog that wanted to go home, then lost it immediately, recaptured the frog, acquired a chick, delivered the frog, learned I can't swim, and found a box. Almost anything and everything you do in Tomba pops up some text, lists the points you'll earn, and logs it in your start menu under Event, which feels like a huge mistake as before you can even move Tomba, you've got a plural number of events in here. But either way, the listing reminds you of the event and may even hint at the solution. The only downside is that they don't remind you who to talk to, where they are, or even tell you what's a main or more optional event, which would be helpful. And if you've ever found yourself enjoying the lengthy trading quests that turn up in almost every Legend of Zelda game, you're gonna have a great time here. Because what Tomba lacks in its non-existent dungeons, it makes up for in these events, which appeared so frequently and in some of the most unexpected ways. Like falling into a fire only to get a new event, which I still haven't figured out a solution for, but I've revisited this area dozens of times hoping to figure it out. Or throwing a frisbee crab into a wall and discovering something, only to come rushing back hours later once you'd connect the dots. It got me thinking, when's the last time, if ever, that discovering and adding a quest to your log felt fun? Sure, the quests can be fun, the rewards could be good, but the simple tweak to treat every small request or environmental puzzle as an event with fanfare and jolly text dancing across the screen was so much more engaging than a list of things I barely remember mass accepting at a quest board. It probably helps that there's a healthy variety of these strange events that require even odder solutions and feature enough variety that I wanted to complete all of them. And the only reason that I didn't is that I had to stop myself, write down my thoughts, and talk about them here. I'm surprised that in all the years since, I haven't seen any games expand on this idea. Maybe it's because Adventure Platformer or Fetch and Frolic or just Fetch Quest the game hasn't got the same ring to it as Puzzle Platformer. And while yes, I understand that most people hear Fetch Quest and think bad, aren't all quests at their most basic level going somewhere, performing a task, and reporting back? Luckily, Tomba isn't really at risk of burning you out with redundant, boring events when tasked with things like leaping into a series of dwarves whose cries for help allow you to learn their language. And it certainly isn't going to bore you with the unique ways it reveals each new event. I expected to come away from Tomba having experienced a fun platformer with a background and foreground mechanic, but I did not expect the amount of RPG in this game. You've got reusable items like bells that will warp you to key locations of old men, and single-use items to warp to any part of the map. as well as key items for events, new equipment like pants, weapons that you'll collect throughout the adventure. You could even say crafting is here, with one single event in the game allowing you to combine two lesser weapons into a better one. You'll also see some of those Zeldatroid influences, with certain items or powers required to progress further. Which, yes, does introduce plenty of backtracking through areas to access previously unreachable items, like these color-coded chests scattered throughout the world, whose corresponding keys will be handed out as you meet the biggest signifier of progress in this game: older and older men. Another sign we've fallen into the world of role-playing, or adventure game, are the pockets in your shorts that are filled to the brim with so many items that I felt a wave of relief when realizing there is a sort button, which does require a manual button press to trigger the spring cleaning, and it's still not the most fun to open, sort, change pages, and select an item just to add or remove a status effect over and over. But all the inventory pain is worth it when you see their face light up as you deliver a fresh DoorDash order of wine that you kept in your shorts as you ran through the jungle to get here. To my surprise, Tomba also includes a quality of life feature that some modern games still neglect. If mid-conversation you're given a new event that you coincidentally already completed, the game immediately checks it off your list without having to end the conversation, then immediately re-enter it for credit. So if this old man asks you to safely drop off a handful of baby chicks, you can just immediately spit them out of your mouth, where you'd stored them while you climbed a mountain, and onto the floor. All of these events add to your character growth, not in strength or skill points, but on screen with an arbitrary number in the corner representing adventure points, which limit progression to some areas and events, a strange additional gate right behind the item gate already in place. But it's one I never worried about, as my completely random decision on which events to complete and when apparently was always above the minimum needed for entry. Though there are still some AP boxes, which you unlock once you've collected enough AP, only to give you more AP, that still elude me. And, as required by any good RPG on the PS1, you'll visit top-down towns with pre-rendered backgrounds which serve as hubs for a lot of the main events as you progress through the story. This is told through quite a few animated cutscenes, which aren't nearly as long as the opening movie, but are a fun surprise as they flesh out the story. The synopsis is that the absolute swine that stole your grandfather's bracelet have cast evil spells over many areas of the game, not only affecting the citizens of those islands, but also disguising the location and means to defeat these evil pigs. And maybe I'm stretching the definition of an RPG here, because the events and inventory could easily fit a point-and-click adventure game. But Tomba manages to be more than the run left to right through a level leaping and climbing game that I had assumed at first, instead being an amalgamation of several genres that make it feel unique and interesting. At this point, you're probably loudly announcing, well, that sounds great, I'm booting up my PS3 to play Tomba right now. Well, there are a few things you should be aware of. You see, that interesting mixture of genres does have a few problems that might turn you away, one of which I discovered right before visiting the first old man who really gets the story rolling forward. These tree limbs, which you've seen one other time so far, aren't the most intuitive to use. Once you hold a direction and start swinging, Tomba couldn't care less about timing. Instead, you'll release the direction that started your swing, and instead press the direction you want to jump, like up or up and to the right, which the manual does describe, but the only instruction in-game was over a grassy path which didn't mention anything past starting to swing. But hey, now you're armed with that knowledge, so you're good, right? Well, Tomba is sometimes very, very particular. You see, Tomba needs his fingers to touch the branch. Do not bump Tomba's chest or you will fall into that pit. Tomba's also strangely particular when climbing. Hit a little above and you'll end up doing this slippery landing and maybe miss the grab entirely, but with some practice you should be fine. Then another oddity appeared. In some of these early struggles with the controls, I missed the jump, impaling myself on these bamboo stalks and receiving a game over, which thankfully just sent me back to my last save point. But not with my lives reset to 2 or 3, but instead 0, the exact number I saved at. But I wasn't too worried. I earned some more extra lives and continued on. Then I started to notice that lives were only ever given out when opening a chest or completing an event, neither of which ever respawn or can be replayed. So I went searching for some answers, and Tomba has a finite number of extra lives. Now, apparently at very specific and quite large AP levels, you do earn 3 extra lives, but grinding an extra 100,000 AP late in the game isn't something you can really rely on. And I've hoarded revives before or healing potions till late game in RPGs because I didn't want to waste anything, but having a limited pool of lives throughout the entire game sent me down a spiral. I saved all the time. If I ever lost a life, I restarted at the checkpoint, which, even with the power of the PS3, can't speed up these load times. I even discovered you save a tiny bit of time if you restart the second after being killed, right before try again shows up. But other than swinging over a spike pit earlier, nothing's that dangerous, it's not that hard of a game, it shouldn't be that bad. Oh no, a new area that's windy. This one section of the game was not fun. It has instant death pits everywhere, and the wind affects your already quite strange jump, which was fine on flat ground or with a few enemies around, but not here. It's here that I also discovered not all walls are climbable, and like the tree limbs, you better land that perfect ledge grab. This area turned a lighthearted frolic through the woods into a save-scumming nightmare. Now, using some of those finite lives could let you progress much quicker through this area than I did, but I was afraid of ending up with 0 lives and having to restart all the time. Has my fear turned me into the very thing I was afraid of? Yeah, kinda. But it doesn't change the fact that this area and the caves following it are the hardest platforming challenges in the game. A game that has very few difficult platforming sections up until this point, which might have let you practice over non-instant death pits, and there's hardly any difficult platforming after this either. So it ends up feeling like a huge spike in something I didn't think the game was really focusing on or teaching me. Similar difficulty spikes appear when you encounter an evil pig and attempt to put them in their designated evil pig bag. They bombard you with rocks, wheels, fire, and so much more, while all you have to do is bite them and throw them in the bag. But the bag is constantly moving or spinning and you have to time the throw, so it feels more like a game of chance, hoping when the pig appears, you'll grab it at the right time as the bag turns your way or comes back on screen. If you're lucky with the timing, the fight is over in one throw. Otherwise, you'll keep replaying, hoping the stars align and you can just end the fight. Tomba as a character you control feels suited for light combat and light platforming with a lot of fun events and zany scenarios, and to me, these windy platforming tests and odd timing-based boss fights are not Tomba's strength. But let's end on a high note. I'm a huge fan of Tomba's world, its strange creatures from flowers that bloom and attack while laughing or crying in your face, skybound jellyfish that can only be damaged by themselves, Venus flytraps with an interconnected digestive tract, and so many other creatures and obstacles that I've never seen anywhere else. Whole towns are filled with supposed ratatouilles. A single timekeeper runs a massive clock for just a town of 4-ish people. And trees sprout from nothing. It's an incredibly unique and perplexing world that's just fun to explore. I do wish the map was a little clearer, but I struggle to think of a good solution when you've got a mix of 2D, 3D, and somewhere in between, all in the same game. And for the most part, these areas are so visually unique and connected in some very memorable ways that you'll end up learning the layout decently quickly. But the limits of my map memory never prevented me from looking forward to and enjoying each new area with its new creatures and events to discover. Now, with all that silly context and reasoning out of the way, what do I really think about Tomba in a bite-sized synopsis that you could easily skip right to? Well, Tomba really impressed me, which is why I'm slotting it at a 4 out of 5 as a weathered gem. Sure, some of the difficulty spikes came out of nowhere and were made more annoying by the finite lives and my fear of losing that precious resource. But I had so much fun with each new event, creature, and area I discovered, and Tomba's just fun to control, at least when the danger isn't too intense. And the 2.5D nature of the game gives another unique wrinkle, though it's used a little less than I actually expected. But that's just my opinion, and I'm not out to tarnish any fond memories, so please share your memories and thoughts on this game. I'd love to talk more about it. But with my thoughts out of the way, I did start to wonder what the world thought about Tomba. What legacy did it leave behind? Well, it sits at an 83.56 on this archived game rankings page from the time, a site that apparently hates rounding. But it doesn't seem like those good review scores actually helped Tomba sell, as it never received the green greatest hits label on its spine, an honor that according to a Business Wire article from 1997 had 2 requirements. Sales must be in excess of 150,000 units, and the title must have been on the market for more than a year. Even with the seemingly low sales, Tomba 2 The Evil Swine Return was released 2 years after the first game, which received a slightly lower 82.99% because GameRankings does not mess around with its decimal precision, unlike the PlayStation 1 itself. This sadly wasn't the turning point in Tomba's history. As Kotaku reported, sales were even lower than its predecessors. And Whoopee Camp closed shortly after its release, although according to an IGN article, a good deal of staff ended up at Access Games, a studio who've gone on to make several Ace Combat games for the PSP, Deadly Premonition, and most recently helped with the remastered Final Fantasy VIII and Mega Man Zero ZX Legacy Collection. But where does that leave the legacy of Tomba? Well, that's a little less clear. I don't think you could argue that Tomba itself invented the 2.5D style, as Klonoa not only came out in the exact same month, but technically 14 days earlier in Japan. And 2.5D games like Pandemonium and Nights into Dreams were released in 1996, with probably some earlier examples I'm just not aware of, but share if you know any. Maybe you could make the argument that Tomba inspired a lot of games where you mainly run left to right, and sometimes transition in and out of the background. Well, some indie games like Mutant Mudds let you do that, but at very specific points, as does Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Although the Virtual Boy Warrior Land series has the same feature from back in 1995. One game that comes to mind for me is Yoshi's Crafted World, which sees you interacting with the background and foreground elements throughout the game. But you could also say that's more inspired by Yoshi's Story, which featured alternate paths outside of the normal left to right, and there's not any climbing, biting, or anything close to acrobatics. Really, the only game I can confidently say took inspiration from Tomba is the successfully kickstarted upcoming indie game Double Shake, which during its campaign specifically called itself a love letter to games such as Mischief Makers, Tomba, and Klonoa. It's got a demo out there which I had a lot of fun with, especially because it includes event-like quests to discover, features throwing, and even has options to recreate that classic PS1 look with dithering and vertex snapping. It's slated to release in 2024, and Limited Run Games will be publishing it for PS4, PS5, and Switch. So if you're looking for some modern PS1 and Tomba vibes, maybe check out that demo and keep an eye out for the full game if you're at all interested. But the legacy of Tomba, thankfully, does not end there. Limited Run Games has announced that through the power of their Carbon engine, which makes it easier to put old games on new platforms, they will be re-releasing Tomba on Nintendo Switch, PS4, PS5, and Steam in 2024, which I'm so glad will introduce an actually affordable way for anyone to play Tomba if they want to, and maybe Tomba 2 someday. And with that, I'm checking Tomba off my backlog and moving on to the next game. As always, please share any of your memories and thoughts on this game. I would love to talk more about it, and send over any suggestions you have for games I should clear off my backlog next. I'm always looking for more votes to help me decide. And thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.